Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee here today. And today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is how do you actually create innovation while also at the same time uh, keep the bus running, keep the operations going? So, this balance between, especially if you're going through a big business transformation where you're uh, having to keep operations going, and especially if you're in manufacturing or in healthcare, really a place where operations are extremely important. And when you take your eye off the ball, bad things happen, right? People get hurt, people might die. So, operational excellence is really important. So, you're trying to do all of this operational excellence work. And over here, you're trying to do innovation too at the same time. And I get asked this question from so many managers. I spent all of my time focused on the operations of the business. How on earth am I going to find the time and, frankly, the mind space and create a culture that is going to be able to do innovation? It just feels like it's so completely different. And so, what I'd love for you to share today is to say hello, so I can say hello back to you. And then also to just share how are you managing and thinking about this balance between operational excellence and innovation? Because I would love to hear what your lived experience has been like. What's worked for you? What hasn't worked? And we can work that into the discussion today. So I have a couple best practices on this. I've been recently working with a company that has for the longest times, hundreds of years, been in a manufacturing business and just making stuff. And if they don't do things well, again, this is heavy, heavy manufacturing. If they are not careful, bad things can happen. Plants can explode. Many people can get hurt. So, operational excellence is often measured by, sorry, forgot to turn off my phone here. It's Operational excellence is measured often by making sure everything works, nobody gets hurt. So, the safety record and other things like that are really important to this. So, and they now need to go in a completely different direction, really change their manufacturing into completely new products, focus much more on the market. And they're going, we don't know how to do this. We, as managers, for 20, 30, 40 years in some cases, have been rewarded for keeping the bus moving, keeping the factory going, keeping everything working fantastically well. Now you want us to stop that, and you actually want us to break it. You want us to break all of that and do something completely different. And the things that you realize is that this is such a contradiction. How on earth are you supposed to do this? So that's what I want to talk about today is how do you focus on the operations of business because that can't stop. That is what drives the core of the business. And frankly, that existing legacy business is what generates the cash to be able to fund the new business. So you can't let it just stop. And people are depending on it too. And so, how do you do that? And then, how do you also not just drive innovation, but scale it and innovate specifically for growth into these new areas? So, a couple things I just want to just point out. One of when I was doing my research on this, it's actually three different types of mindsets. There's the operational efficiency, there's innovation, and then this whole new area of agile, which is an ongoing way of running a business or running different departments. Where you're much more responsive to the changing customer needs that are out there. And one CIO said that they characterized it as this way, and I thought it was so clever that operational efficiency, again, you want all of this great managing and minimizing risk at the lowest cost is like juggling chainsaws. I mean, you're juggling the chainsaws, and if you're not careful, if you drop anything, bad things are going to happen. Innovation is where there's a high, high demand in the organization and outside of it for just art, just beautiful art. No idea what people were like. You don't know what's going to work, but you're just out there creating art. So the boundaries are completely off. That's very different from juggling chainsaws. And the agile groups, if you have those, are people who are operating a fast food stand. They're just taking orders, they're responding to things, and then they're going back and saying, okay, like what else is out there now? We're waiting for it. And those are three very different mindsets, different types of operations, and very different types of cultures. So being able to hold all of those different ways of working and focuses as a leader is incredibly difficult. And so here are some ways to be thinking about this. Just thinking about innovation. If you think about the innovation that has to happen, there are the big, huge, long term innovations of business transformation. But the most successful business transformations and digital transformations, these grandiose plans, are oftentimes broken out into very detailed achievements of what you want to have. And then breaking them up into smaller groups, smaller things that become much more tangible and achievable by the different groups is a key part because in the end, it's great to have an idea, but unless you can break it down into components that you can then put back into the organization and fundamentally change the core of the organization and stand up and turn these teams and transform these teams into these new teams, you're not going to be able to get there. So the operational efficiency, that talent, that expertise it's honed, it's developed because every single day they're looking for more ways to become more efficient. So taking that ability to tweak, to look at what sometimes is called sustaining innovations and apply it towards these new efforts, towards larger innovations, is one of the key things that organizations who are really good at transformations are able to do. So let me just emphasize this. Operational excellence is one of the core skills of organizations that need to go through a transformation because they can apply that discipline. They can take the leaders who are really good at this and apply them to these new processes that are being developed by the innovation teams and the thinkers to say, okay, how do we now move this in a new direction? That way, you're actually shifting things on a regular basis, not to maintain the status quo, but to move and slowly shift the organization into new areas. Now that works. We can see a seamless, smooth transition between the old and the new. That's not so easy to do if you're having to create something completely new. So I just want to say, first of all, oftentimes when you can shift things fairly in a fairly predictable, fairly workman-like way in your transformation work, that is an excellent way to do it. And that takes a mental shift for the leaders who have always been thinking, my job is to maintain the status quo. My job now is actually to transition the existing business that I know so well into these new areas. And one of the key what I wanna spend most of today talking about is how do you actually do this? How do you actually figure out how to create that mental space to do that? So before I do that, I have a couple, great comments from people. So first of all, just wanna share, Jay has this great comment that how does he balance at his attention? Jay, I don't know how you do this. 70% of your time is spent on innovating, 30% on operations. And the way he says is I make sure operations is something that is set up and running without any hitches. So Jay, I would love to hear more. Like, how do you actually do that? And I think it's going to be in the first thing here, strong focus on processes, delegation, trust in people. And that is a key part, I think, that we're going to talk about in just a second on the first thing that you can do to get into this new space. Jay has a couple of comments here that breakups can become breakthroughs. Two cultures are separate, and after defining uniqueness, reestablish rapprochement. And he also said that added seamless transitions comprised of multiple small disruptions. So Jay, I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes the cultures are so different you need to establish a separate entity and then work really well in terms of bringing it back. That can work, but only if there is a clear path to connect it back. Sometimes these innovation teams are so separate. They're in a completely different location, even different floor. The culture is completely different, and integrating them back is really impossible. So you have a choice then of either setting them up as a new business unit and then moving people into that and inculcating them with the new culture, or you try to squish them back into the organization and do a culture transplant into the old organization. Both are extremely hard. And so those are possible. But what I have found is that some companies spend a huge amount of time putting the innovation into these outside teams and then not changing anything back in the core of the business. And I think the key point here, to your point, is that you want to change the core and then have this rapprochement, this meeting of these two cultures when it's time to bring them together. Um, and then let's see, we have from Sikantha, in any industry in any field of industry, adaptation of technology and seeing for operational excellence from the very first day, then it can become industrial 5.0. You make a really good point that keeping these two things in mind from the very beginning is absolutely essential. That in order to have this great operational excellence, you have to, from the very beginning, really think about how do I continually innovate to bring in that operational excellence? And we were talking about this last week too, when we are talking about perfection and excellence. It's the combination of these two things, holding them together in the same space and realizing they're actually the same. That innovation and excellence and operational excellence come hand in hand together. They don't live in separate places. So, what I want to do today is talk a little bit about how this actually happens. And the very first thing is to think about your role as a leader. What is your role in terms of thinking about things? And I found some great data from Bain. So, I just wanted to share that. I'm going to make this a little bigger. And this is one of the things that they found, is that when they actually moved and they were looking at how people were shifting their mind frames from where they spent most of the time. And the way that before, again, this is a group that they were looking at how agile was changing the ability to, again, manage both operational efficiency and innovation. And they found that before they started putting agile in, that 60% of the time was spent in business reviews, operation reviews. And basically the leaders were saying, we're just basically making, suggestions on how to make things better, how to run things better. They were constantly trying to make things more efficient. 30% of the time were spent on talent and culture, and only 10% of the time was on strategy, growth, and development. Now, when they started doing agile, things completely shifted. The operational management shrank to just 25% of the time. And most of that gain went back into strategy development and growth. And what I found, the key thing around this, the most important thing around this is the fact that you're no longer involved in the day-to-day operations as that leader. Now, this can be at the very top of the organization. It could be you're a middle manager. You could be a frontline manager. Instead of you doing all the things and really managing all of that, what you're doing is you're putting the work back into the teams who are the best able to actually manage, to actually accomplish the work. And so this is really examining everything that you do every day. And you have to ask yourself, am I the only person who can do this work? Is there somebody else on my team, somebody else in the organization who can do the things that I do? Keep keep a tally of everything that you do every day for a week, and then go back and say, which of those things did I have to do? And you may be thinking, well, I can do it better than anyone else, but can somebody else do it? Maybe not as well as you, but they can still do it. And that is the hardest thing for us to do as leaders, is to give up that the active hands-on work of being a manager, because it fills us with the sense that we are being useful, that we are helping the organization. But the reality is, you need to be focused on the work that only you can do, the work that only you, in your position, with the vision that you can see, with the spread of knowledge and expertise that you have, the work that only you can do, the decisions that only you can make, to see the information integrated, the information that only you can see. Because by putting the work into the teams, you're actually, first of all, investing in them and saying to them, hey, you can do this work. You don't need me to do it. And they get more capable, and they're also just going to be happier to be empowered. And then that makes sure that you can only focus on the things that are really important. So sure, the team may make decisions that may not be the right ones, and you go back on them. You have to reverse them. But 99% of decisions are reversible. What you need to focus on as a leader are the 1% of decisions that are nearly irreversible. Because once you make those, there's no going back. So that's where you have to put your attention. And it allows you then to also focus on the vision, on the strategy, on prioritizing the tasks, simplifying the complex, and making sure everyone is focused on what everybody needs to be doing, and then let them go do it. And it also allows you the time, again, to focus on hiring the right people to do the right jobs now that you've identified. I'll give you an example of this. I was working with one team around their transformations, and they were each person was asked, what are you going to start, stop, and continue? And the CFO was sitting there thinking for a long time, in his little corner, and he came up to me, and goes, I think I'm going to stop doing something. I'm going to announce it to people today, and they're going to be shocked. So he came in front of the group and he said, I have to approve every single price change that we have. And I'm not going to do that anymore. And this audible gasp went up, like, well, we have to get your approval. And he goes, yeah, but I look at these things and I approve every single one. I'm not going to second guess you as the people who say, I need to have this pricing change. Why would I second guess you? You know your business better than I do. And now you just want the sort of assurance from me that you did the right thing. I'm telling you, you're doing the right thing because I approve every single one of these. I'm getting myself out of this because he realized that it was taking up an inordinate amount of time. So he said, I'm going to stop doing this. I'm going to send it right back to you, and the buck stops with you. If you think this decision needs to go through, that's great. Highly approve of it. We're going to go through with it. So take a look at how much time you're spending on doing these things, because I'll just show up one other slide here because I think it was so fascinating in terms of what they found. This is again coming from Bain, that the best managers were the ones who were able to have more time focused on these strategic outcomes, on these innovations that the organization needed to work on. And what they found is that they were 40% more productive as a result. And so the concern and fear that the operations would drop was just the opposite. They were much more productive because, again, the decisions were pushed down. The people who were capable of doing that work were either doing it or were being developed to do that. And then the leaders across the company were able to spend the time to work with each other on these bigger strategic issues that then created even more productivity and growth and profits for the organization. So just wanted to share that one example, that one of the biggest issues I hear from people is, I don't have time to do innovation. I just can't pull away from the operations. And I'm telling you, you absolutely can. Just like Jay was saying before, that this is not about the things that you need to focus on operations. He said, I set up the processes, and I make sure it works. And he makes sure again that the operations are running and going. And as long as they're running and going, he just deals with the exceptions and can focus on the innovation. So the very first thing I say to leaders is, let's take a look at your calendar. Let's look at the things and identify the decisions and activities that only you can do. And the innovation driving towards the future are the things that leaders need to be focused on, because leaders create change. And if you're not creating change, then you're not necessarily a leader anymore. You're the manager of the status quo. And I think what we need are leaders. The second thing I would say is to empower teams. And that is to, again, I talked about the delegation, like how do you actually empower the teams then? And one of the key things here is to connect the teams back to who their customers are, to connect them back to the why. Because unless they understand why they are doing things, they're going to be constantly back and looking to you as a leader. Okay, so do we do this now? Do we do that now? Be really clear about the vision, about the future, and who this customer is that we're trying to build for, to understand their needs so we can operate efficiently, but also to understand why we're also going on this innovation journey together. And then be really clear on the what. This is so important. to say, let's have clear KPIs with the existing operations, but also let's lay out what this roadmap looks like for innovation. Sure, we have a lot of things we're trying, but what does that look like for this quarter? What does it look like for the second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter? Ideally, out 6 quarters. One transformation leader that I've talked to said, I map out a 6 quarter walk. We're going to walk over these next 6 quarters for the next 18 months, and this is where we're going to be 18 months from now. So that gives people an idea like what that path looks like because change, innovation can feel very disruptive, very uncomfortable because we know how we fit into the world in the existing way that we think and work. But how are we going to fit into the new world? And until we're clear on what that world looks like, what our role is going to be, what's going to happen, then we're going to feel very, very disrupted because our relationship to the organization, to the work, to my job, do I even have a job 18 months from now, is going to be uncertain. So creating that clarity, creating that surety of what the path looks like it can really help people through that change and innovation. So being clear on what people are going to do, when they're going to do it, who's going to do it. You may not have all the details worked out, but the key thing is you have some sort of path so people know what's going on. And the number one thing I hear from people why they don't do this, first of all, because they don't have time, but if they had time, they also worry that the teams may not be ready to hear this. There may be some bad news in here. We may be shutting down some of the old products and services, and they're not going to want to hear that. I go, well, they would like to hear that. The sooner the better, so that they know how to prepare for that future. Are they going to be transitioned into a new role? Will they be retrained? Will you provide placement services for them? Will you open your own network to support them in finding a new position if that's needed? So it's going to happen anyways. If it's in the plans, you're much better off sharing it with them and giving them the agency that they have already, acknowledging that and empowering them to say, okay, we're going to be going through this together. I have a very good friend, and I mentioned her, Rebecca Marcia Kaufman, whose job was to at a large financial services company shut down a division over 18 months, and she came in and told people immediately, "That's what I'm doing here, and we're going to make sure we do this in an orderly way. We're going to make sure that you all have places to go, either within the company or outside, and we're going to do this together. So let's get to it." And she made it very clear that this was going to happen, and people were coming up to her. I mean, she was constantly going to goodbye parties, and people were constantly coming up to her saying, "Thank you. Thank you so much for this great transition. We know it had to happen. That's the way business is, but this was so much better than getting a pink slip one day, just laid into my inbox, and being told I no longer had a job. At least you gave me the 6 months so I could prepare, I could get ready, and the transition was great." So that's the second thing. So first thing is make sure your teams understand the why, the vision, and what your customers are needing and how the world is changing, how the market is changing. Second is the what. And I think that the third thing is to create, again, that agency that anybody can experiment, that anybody can come up with an idea, that we can see what works. So this is that incremental approach to be able to do this. And the key thing here is that you have the ability to experiment. I mean, do this already in operational excellence. We ask people to come up and say, "Hey, that doesn't work." But it also says, "Hey, I don't understand why we're doing this. Can you please explain to me?" That ability to ask, to challenge, to explain, to say, "I don't get it. Why are we doing this? And this seems kind of crazy. Why are we doing this?" Is another way of thinking about it. That ability to challenge is so key because you won't get to where you need to be, truly being excellent, unless people feel like they have that safe space to be able to come forward with what it is that they're seeing and observing. And the fourth thing is to make sure that everybody in the business who may be impacted by any of the changes that you're making can see it, that is visible. Because the worst thing that can happen is like, what's happening over there in Mary's department? And what's happening? What's Joe doing? He's doing some crazy things with his team. What's going on there? So instead of keeping it all within that team, making sure you're highly visible, that you're informing all the other people in the business who could be potentially impacted by that. And this is where technology can be so helpful by just having that daily post, that daily sharing within your internal collaboration tools to say, hey, we're doing lots of things. If you ever want to check it out, this is what it is. You may even want to push it to your partner so they get that daily or weekly update about what changes you're making. So I know there are quite a few comments here, and I'm just going to say the last one is to just think instead of thinking about the big bang release. This is where agile becomes very, very helpful. Is you're breaking all of these big innovations down into sprints, and you're releasing things much more frequently to see what works and what doesn't work. You go back and change it again. Again, just great practices coming out of operational excellence and agile into the world of innovation. So there are quite a few examples here. So let's see. So Oswan Jefferson shares that yes, definitely. Being connected to the customer is exactly what is needed. This is the mindset, and this is why we have to absolutely do that. Um, and also, Oswan shares that clarity catalyzes collective resilience in teams. I like that. Thank you very much. Catalyzes collective resilience. Let's see. Jay also says that safety and trust are so essential. Thank you for pointing and emphasizing that because unless you have that safe space to experiment, to come forward, and it's more than just saying, hey, I think we could adjust this tool here. Again, coming up with the suggestions that are practical, operationally focused, efficiency focused, that's fantastic. And I think widely accepted. It's also being able to come up with and say, the way that we operated our last team meeting wasn't as good as it could have been. I observed that in that situation, your behavior had this impact. And I'll have a session in a few weeks talking about the culture of feedback that needs to be in place to create that safety. So much more on that, Jay, in a little bit. Han says share risks and chances and all foresights and be able to create the space to be able to act. So absolutely key. So again, um, sharing all of that is so important. Having and creating and holding that space is so important. So some great comments here. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. As I close up today, I just wanted to just share a couple other quick things. Again, if you have questions or any comments, please put them into the comments here. I read everything. Would be happy to respond back to you or talk about it on air. And then next week, I'm going to talk about something a little difficult, which is I want to talk about the importance of having intimacy at work. Because if you think about the best job you ever had, and again, this is not the squishy, uncomfortable intimacy, the stuff that gets you into trouble, me too kind of trouble. When you think about the best job you ever had, there was a connection, a sense of inclusion and belonging, and the sense of intimacy. You felt like you were like brothers and sisters together with the other members of the team. You were connected in your mission. You trusted each other. There was this unspoken connection between people. And we actually saw each other and had this level of connection that just transcended things. Again, those things don't always last forever, but there was this connection that was just really special. So we're going to talk about how important that is and how do we actually develop that? And what does it actually look like? What is the role of connection and relationship, love, intimacy, but in a platonic, professional way at work? And rather than shy away from that, and because I hear from so many people like, oh, I can't talk about anything personal at work because we want to have this divide. We'll talk about that next week, about why it's so important to bring your personal insights, to bring your strengths, your expertise into the workplace. So we'll talk about that next week. A really interesting topic. I will hope that you'll join. And it's kind of interesting that it's happening the day after Valentine's. But I want to definitely talk about how do we think about this other side, the emotional side of work, and especially the connections we have with each other and our teammates. All right. That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me. And again, all the best in balancing innovation and operational excellence. It is what the best, greatest leaders do, being able to hold these kinds of contradictions in one place together to create an incredible organization. All right. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye bye.